Hello and welcome to episode 123 of the Notcast. It is Tuesday, 27th of July 2021. We're still on the slow path out of whatever it is that the past 18 months or so has been. I'm still talking about my records to my mobile phone on my shelf. It's been a busy few days, and I only ever do these when I feel like them and when I've got the energy to do them and when my brain tells me to do them. Today I'm going to be talking about the New Order album released in 2005, Waiting for the Sirens Call, alongside the singles and the period both before, during and after the release of the album, in my quest to talk about every record ever made. And at one point in my life, New Order were absolutely my favourite band. They're still very, very good. I love them very, very dearly. I will buy everything that has their name on it. Well, actually, I won't, as previous episodes have shown. But obviously, the need to track down every single version of a compilation album no longer exists for me. So we have to start the lead in to this with a kind of like a pen picture of to where we are in the world's chronology. End of 2002, New Order have finished the tour in support of the album Get Ready, a grand total of something like 36 shows. They've released the box set, Retro. They've released a singles album called International. They've expected you to plonk down your hard cash in exchange for physical objects and live performances. And the world that they were in at that point was changing dramatically. Now, it's probably difficult to conceive of a world without the internet, or a world without broadband, or a world without connectivity. The world was going through a kind of like a digital transition at that point. The concept of selling physical objects with music on hadn't become a niche way of doing it. People were buying CDs because they were on the shelves at supermarkets, and CDs were fast and exciting and sleek, and the industry wanted a way of being able to maintain its revenue stream. The old-fashioned way of thinking was that a band could spend 2 years, or if you're Guns N' Roses, 17 years recording an album, and at the end of that there would be something that people would buy. Now, the recording for the album Waiting for the Sirens Call took place over 2 years between 2003 and early 2005 at a very expensive set of studios, which I think were in Bath, and the total cost of the album, according to Peter Hook's book Substance, which is here, was £700,000, which is a ridiculous amount of money for an album, especially when you consider that some bands, they go into the studio, they spend 12 days, and then the record is done. New Order's way of working was very, very different. So, for example, the idea would be that the songs would be built in the studio. They'd be built bit by bit, so rhythm parts would be designed, then keyboard parts, guitar parts, maybe vocals, and the song would be built like a house. The foundations of it were structured, and they didn't necessarily have the plan as to what the finished songs were going to be like, which probably explains why none of the band made a huge amount of money at that period in time. I always think that that's quite lazy, actually, is that it's a heck of a lot cheaper to write a song when you're writing it in your home studio than it is when you're writing it in a £1,000 a day studio. But what am I? I'm only a guy. I've never made an album, so I wouldn't necessarily know the right way of doing it. The other thing about creativity, as you probably know, is that it happens when it happens. It can't be switched on and switched off like a tap. Nick Cave apparently sits down at his desk at 9 o'clock, writes songs all day long. When he thinks he's got something, he keeps it, and when he doesn't, he just keeps moving on and spends some of his time undoubtedly writing emails and other business-related activity. For me, when I'm writing songs, they happen when they happen, normally about one every 2 weeks, and it comes quite quickly to me, almost as if the song falls out and it suddenly appears fully formed out of the fog of everyday thinking, normally late at night. But every band is different, every band works differently. And if someone said to me that making an album would cost £700,000, frankly, I wouldn't. I'd just write the songs elsewhere, and then I'd go into a studio and I'd do the whole thing in about a month at most. Although obviously none of you have heard my singing voice, so you can't tell if I'm any good at that or not. But effectively, what we have is a huge investment of time and money, because that £700,000 is a lot of cash, and there's no guaranteed return around it. The idea being is if you put the album out and you sell the album, people will buy it. But of course, that's not necessarily the case. Now, I don't have the sales figures for Waiting for the Sirens Call, the umpteenth album by New Order, released in March 2005 or April 2005. What I do have is, to give you an example, the sales figures for an album by another person, Blaze Bayley, who used to sing in Iron Maiden. This is his first solo CD, Silicon Messiah, and in the US that sold 480 copies, which, considering he had previously, the album before that had been an Iron Maiden album that sold 65,000 copies, is pretty surprising, all things considered. But it's fair to say the world had turned upside down. Black was white, right was wrong, left and right, and everything was confused. Cats and dogs were living together. It was all crazy. And record labels were obviously following the old way of working, which is that you make the record, you sell the record, you sell lots of copies of the record. They hadn't necessarily, or perhaps hadn't really caught on to the fact that MP3s, SoulSeek, Napster was going to kill the industry dead. The thing that could be sold was something that was unique and unduplicatable, the unique option, which you could only get from the band itself. People didn't care about CDs. CDs were basically boxes of MP3s in silver discs containing MP3s. That's what they were. It was a data delivery system. And so selling records or selling CDs became very much a dead and dying art. And obviously that's continued over the years. So the idea was that the tour would promote the album. These days, the album promotes the tour. And so New Order played a grand total of 46 days in support of Waiting for the Sirens Call album, which was the only shows that they played between 2002 and 2011. And that's not that many shows. I think during the recording of Waiting for the Sirens Call, towards the end of the period when the album was being made, Peter Hook had realised that he was drinking too much and checked himself into a rehab facility in order to kick his various addictions. Now, I have an addictive personality. I know this, and I have to work very hard to make sure that I don't succumb to those. My addictions, as you've probably worked out, involve buying records almost all of the time, which means that you have less headaches in the morning, but maybe not less money in your bank account. So it's more manageable in that respect. But I know what it's like to go out and to think just one, then two, then three, and then all of a sudden you're down a rabbit hole, and you've had far too many drinks, and you've done some embarrassing things that you don't even remember, let alone regret. But Peter Hook became sober during the recording of this album. He missed the last week of mixing for the record, and the bass takes that he had made were put together by somebody else at the final mixing stage. There is some resentment that exists between Bernard and Peter as a result of that. Bernard thinking, as with Republic, that he had to salvage the album and put in more work than anybody else in order to make it happen. I'm not going to take sides around that. I might talk about it later on. But effectively, parts of the finished mix of the album was not one that Peter Hook had necessarily heard or signed off to, because he was busy getting sober, which is important. But being sober also means that you have a degree of clarity around things that are going on about you. You may be compensating for either traumatic events or just overcompensating, at which point your judgment becomes pretty poor if you're over drinking, over drugging, or overdoing anything else. And so therefore, in the sober light of morning, which when you're sober, all mornings are sober, Peter was able to see things that perhaps he hadn't done previously, and he was perhaps masking or hiding, and a lot of people do this, long-standing resentments or feelings, and clouding them with other events and pleasure to make sure that it was more bearable. The conclusion that came out throughout the whole of the period for the Waiting for the Sirens Call album is and it's understandable. I'm not sympathetic to it, but it's understandable. Is that if New Order had worked harder and better at certain points of their career, there would be a bigger, richer band playing to bigger venues, more concerts, more people, more records, more money, and effectively that's where I think the root cause of all the disagreements between Peter and Bernard have turned out is that effectively, and as Thomas Dolby said when talking to Peter Hook, is it comes down to power and money, doesn't it? It comes down to, well, who's got the most power and who's got the most money, and that's pretty much what it's all about, really. It's fair to say New Order could have played more, they could have toured more, they could have made more records. The relative quality of those, I'm not quite sure would have justified that. And if the only thing you're getting out of it is money, you've got to be really sure you absolutely need the money as opposed to not need the money. But for example, Waiting for the Sirens Call had 46 shows over 2 years to promote it. The U2 album that came out at almost exactly the same time had 130 shows. The REM album had something like 110 shows, and they were all over the world, and they were far more prolific in that respect. And then there's a reason why those bands perhaps are bigger, more popular, because more people heard them, more people saw them, and seeing New Order wasn't a thing that happened once every 18 years. It was a thing that happened every 2 years. If you're in U2, for example, or you like U2, you could pretty much rely that, COVID apart, at that point in the career, the band would be touring every 3 to 4 years. You'd get a chance to see them and they'd play a stadium near you. Sure, you'd pay big money for the experience, but it would be a big staging, as opposed to New Order, who may not even play your country for 10 years or 15 years. Being a New Order fan in places like Canada, parts of America, parts of Europe, Australia, was a pretty meagre existence in terms of getting to see your favourite band live. Obviously, it's changed in the later years. Bands have realised they've had to tour instead of selling records. But at this point, the big money and the big investment was still on selling people records, silver discs, boxes with MP3s on. And that's where I think it all started to unravel a little bit. So we're going to go back in time a little bit to the first part of the sessions that we've got for 2003's album. I may have mentioned this previously. The first thing that effectively came out was the soundtrack to the Peter Saville Show. We're here with a Peter Saville designed sleeve. And effectively, the Peter Saville Show was an exhibition at the London Design Museum of Peter Saville's artwork, including the original gold leaf that went into be the True Faith sleeve, for example. And New Order wrote a half-hour instrumental track based upon the soundtrack, so effectively to act as a soundtrack to the exhibition. It was an instrumental half-an-hour song, very similar in form and substance to Elijah from the Low Life album. 3,000 copies were sold from the Design Museum. It probably could have sold more. If I'd have known and have been more cheeky, I would have bought more copies and I would be selling them now on Discogs for more money. It is quite a rare release. You could only buy it from one shop. You couldn't buy it online. And also in 2003, this is a compilation that's given away free with The Independent, but there was also a War Child charity album which featured a New Order cover version of a track called Vietnam, written by Johnny Cliff, that was recorded in 2003. It's an okay kind of reggae-ish cover version, absolutely inessential in the big scheme of things. New Order were never particularly great at cover versions, and this proves that. 2004 was relatively quiet. The band were recording. There was only one New Order related or one New Order song which was released in 2004. It's probably not a song that you necessarily know. It's called The Real Thing, and it's on this album, Gwen Stefani's Love Angel Music Baby. So The Real Thing that's on here is an instrumental New Order track that has been remixed and re-recorded. Peter Hook appears on it playing bass. Bernard sings backing vocals on it. Gwen Stefani sings the vocals. Wendy and Lisa from Prince's band are on percussion and various other instruments. It's called The Real Thing, and it sounds just like Gwen Stefani fronting New Order. It's quite good, but it's a B-side. It's nothing more than that, and it kind of got lost in the shuffle amongst everything else that was going on. This version of the album contains 3 bonus tracks, hence there's a holographic sleeve, a special edition. It's got a remix of The Real Thing on, but the remix of The Real Thing, as far as I can tell, is all Wendy and Lisa, and no Bernard and Peter. So 2004 was a year in the studio, recording, and resentments were riding high, as I've mentioned previously. Peter Hook became sober towards the end of the recording and mixing of the album. The final week of mixing he wasn't present for, and so Bernard probably thought, "Oh, you bastard, I've gone and done it. You've done it again, and here I am going to bail the band out." So their umpteenth album, Waiting for the Sirens Call, was finished. They recorded a lot more than just the 13 or 12 songs or 11 songs that are on the album. They recorded about 7 or 8 extra tracks, which will get a later release. The first single to come out from the album was Krafty. It was called Krafty because it reminded them of Kraftwerk. Here's a white label test pressing of the 12-inch. Called Krafty mixes on there. I don't have the retail 12-inch of Krafty, however there are a lot of formats that were released of it, and Krafty is an okay song. It's not my favourite New Order song at all. It sounds like New Order are trying to write a song that sounds like New Order, if that makes sense. It's the most New Ordery of the songs that's on the album. Here's a promotional CD of Krafty, featuring 5 remixes on: the radio edit, an extended mix, a dub mix, the Phone's reality mix, and the Right On redub mix, whatever that is. We're also in the days of multiple formats of CD singles. So there was a 12-inch single, there was a 2-track CD which featured the single edit and the album version, and another 2-track, another CD. This one featured, this is the English version that features 4 extra mixes. So there's the Glimmers 12-inch, the reality mix, the Andy Green remix, and the re-edit of the album version, which has a different middle section. They're barely different, to be honest, some of these remixes. It felt like they were making mixes up in order to pad out singles as opposed to actually releasing mixes because they had to. They went remix crazy at this period. And this CD has the Glimmers dub mix, which you can't get anywhere else, and the Right On redub remix, which you can't get anywhere else. However, the US CD single of Krafty, which is here, Hello, has 7 tracks on, including a Pink Noise mix, which was not released in the UK, the DJ Dan Vocal Eric Copper club mix, and the Right On re-rub mix, which is probably the same thing as the redub but with a spelling mistake on it. Krafty is an okay song. When you listen to it, it doesn't leap out and say this is the first single from the album, it's a classic. It's just not that type of song at all. It has a kind of like fairly relaxed melody and rhythm part. It's a bit like 1963 in so much as it doesn't grab you by the scruff of the neck and go, this is a classic New Order song. It's like, it's another New Order song, and it's a good New Order song, but it's not first single from the album kind of level. And the album Waiting for the Sirens Call was released in, I think, May 2005. Here's a 2015 remaster of it on double vinyl. I haven't got the original vinyl. I lived in a much smaller place. I had much less money, and I'd just become a dad at the time that this album had come out. So when this album came out, I was thinking, well, I better go where the weather suits my clothes, and I wasn't buying records that I wanted to. I was buying records that I couldn't live without at this point. But the album is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so it's an 11-track album, and I think there's 1 track too far on that. It was released as a double vinyl, so the 2015 remaster effectively duplicates everything about the original apart from copyright notices, and they've remastered it in order to squeeze an extra couple of bits of copyright out of it. So it now falls out of copyright in 2016 as opposed to 2055. Whether anybody will be interested in New Order in 2055, I have no idea. Joy Division, almost definitely. Now on the inner sleeves we've got 4 somewhat random photos. I will explain why later on. I think this is a council house apartment building in London. This looks suspiciously like a rabbit. That looks suspiciously like a recording studio, and this looks suspiciously like some boats. I have no idea why they were chosen. Kind of following on maybe from the stock footage or the stock photos that were used for the Republic album. Since, as you already noticed, I do change my sleeves around, my CD of the album has this photograph of a rabbit in, because rabbits are cute and floofy, and you can't argue with that. It's an 11-track album, and it's 1 track too long, and I think the sequencing is a little off, and I think some of the song titles aren't very new orderly either. Writing in his book, Peter Hook describes it as bland yacht rock, which I think is really unfair, because there's not one song about being in your boat with the wind in your hair and the girl by your side, and there's no kind of songs written about what it's like to have a broken heart whilst also at the same point having a private plane. And if there isn't a yacht rock song called Broken Heart in a Private Plane, I will happily sell you that title for £50 Earth. Now, the album has, as I said, it's got a slightly wonky track listing, in my opinion. I much prefer a different approach to it, and by that what I mean is there's a track called Dracula's Castle that I think should be the end of the album, but it's halfway through. And Dracula's Castle kind of has a the song slowly kind of fades out as each of the instruments and segments and elements stop playing over time. So it's a perfect place to end an album. Instead, the album ends on a track called Working Overtime, which is a kind of semi-Stooges, Joy Division guitar thingy that's all spiky, and it's not particularly good. Now, this is the American version of the album. There are a multitude of CD versions of Waiting for the Sirens Call. Now, the reason that I bought the American version of the album is because it has a bonus track on it. It has a Mac Quayle vocal mix of a track called Guilt is a Useless Emotion. And Guilt is a Useless Emotion is a fantastic song that was intended at one point to be a single, but things went a little bit south as they went along. And I'll also point out that Waiting for the Sirens Call, the sleeve art that you've got on Waiting for the Sirens Call wasn't originally meant to be the sleeve art at all. So the original photograph that was due to be on the cover of Waiting for the Sirens Call ended up being the single cover, which I will dig out for you in a moment. The reason being is that there was a huge tsunami in 2004, Christmas 2004, and the band decided that possibly having this photograph on the front of your album might not be the right one to have. So that's yeah, there, that's more like it. I like to censor this section here so you can't see the bottom, but that was originally meant to be the album cover, and at the last minute, Peter Saville and the band talked about it, and effectively Peter Saville had to think of a new cover, so he put "No" in big letters on, which is quite iconic actually. No, it's interesting and perhaps not very new ordery. There was also another version of the album that was released in Japan, which has an exclusive recording on. Let's quickly go through. It's got the UK booklet on it with a mild bit of copyright change on it, and then it's got, as is normally the fashion with the Japanese editions, some text, potted biography, lyrics both in English and in Japanese, I think, and it's got a thing called an obi, which tells you, well, what's on it and why you should buy it. Thanks to importation costs, Japanese domestic CDs are normally much more expensive than imported versions, and so therefore the Japanese retail version of an album generally tends to have extra songs or material that you can't find on the domestic version of it. So of course, if you're a mega super uber fan like me, you have to go and buy the Japanese editions of the albums because of the extra material. This is the Japanese version of the album that features 2 remixes of Krafty, which we already have, but also has a Japanese version of Krafty, also known as the Kung Fu Generation mix, which is Bernard singing a phonetically correct Japanese translation of the lyrics to Krafty over the basic studio track, which has not been released anywhere else actually, and I'm pretty surprised by that. It would have made, an ideal B-side of a single, but that wasn't to be. So you've got an exclusive Japanese only recording of Krafty on the Japanese CD of Waiting for the Sirens Call. The band were fairly busy during this period. They recorded an iTunes session which featured studio recordings of a number of Joy Division songs, and they also did an interview session as part of what's called the iTunes Originals. And iTunes Originals is largely just recordings of the bands in their rehearsal studio and answering some set questions, kind of like a podcast you have to pay for, or a radio session. The idea of conventional broadcast and print media had started to unravel at this point. There were umpteen television channels, thousands of web pages. If you wanted to buy every remix of some of the singles, you had to go to the 7 Digital store, the Play Store. There's probably a music duck shop or something as well, most of which don't exist anymore. And so therefore, when you've got 13 remixes of a track and you can only put 5 on a CD single and 2 on the other CD single, and you've suddenly got an exciting package of 7 download-only MP3s of various crappy remixes of the song. The next single from the album was called Jetstream. Here's a promotional 12-inch of Jetstream, backed with the Tom Neville mix and the Tom Neville dub. Kind of replicates the 1963 In True Faith promos with that big iconography, that big wodge of text, or that image that's on the front. But this doesn't have a die-cut sleeve, which kind of makes you think maybe there isn't quite so much money floating around in the industry. If there is, it's certainly not going on expensive promotional 12 inches. The Jetstream single was pretty bad. I'll be honest about it. Nobody likes Jetstream, not even Animatronic, who sings vocals on it. The band have only played it 9 times live. They will almost definitely never play it again, I think. And when I saw them play it live, it wasn't particularly good. And also, it's a simplistic song. It seems to be someone's written a song with the idea of, well, we'll make a New Order single, as opposed to we'll write the best song that we can. And the problem with the Waiting for the Sirens Call album is that there is not one killer song on it that you instantly go, that's the classic. There's lots of very good New Order songs on there, but there's not a classic in the way that Regrets or True Faith or Bizarre Love Triangle or anything like that is a classic. There's just a lot of pretty good New Order songs. I mean, they'd written perhaps less songs, junked more parts, and made 11 songs out of the 18 that they did record. It might have been a better selling record. I'm not quite sure. It might have, hell, if they'd toured more than 20 shows or 26 shows a year, it would have been a better selling record as well. I saw New Order 3 times on this tour, and I still grappling my head around the fact that I saw 13% of the entire New Order's world tour in 2005, and I slept in the same bed, my own home, every night. But I'll explain those 3 shows later. The second single from the album then, Jetstream, pretty rubbish. I don't think anybody loves Jetstream. It's got a number of releases. Here's a promotional CD with the radio edit on. I'll stick that there. Then the 3 CD singles, but only 2 were released in the UK. So here's the first CD single, which has a radio edit and an edit of the Richard X remix, which is pretty good actually. It's better than the original version. And then here's the second CD single with remixes by Jack LeConte, Richard X, Tom Neville, Arthur Baker, and the original. And then a thing called Umix software that allows you to remix the track yourself. Here's the retail 12-inch from the UK, which features the Jack LeConte radio edit, Richard X, and Tom Neville remixes. If you're confused, trust me, so am I. I was buying this stuff when it came out. And then there's the US CD single of Jetstream that has a completely different photograph, this time of some clouds, and it has all of the remixes I've mentioned previously, plus a Peter Heller remix, and 2 remixes of Krafty, the DJ Dan dub mix, and the Passengers Revolution club mix of Krafty. Again, I have no memory of those mixes at all. There were too many remixes at that point in time. Jetstream fell on its arse, as it should have done. It's not a great song. It's probably my least favourite New Order single. And if that's the second single from the album, then you might be justified in thinking maybe the album hasn't hit its commercial potential because the band haven't played that many shows. So the first time I saw the band on this tour was at the Wireless Festival in 2005. It was the day before they headlined Glastonbury. It was chucking down. The weather was atrocious. I turned up in time to watch Graham Coxon, then Moby, the last time I saw Moby play a full band show live, and then New Order. And it sold not as many tickets as you might expect, but then New Order didn't really put the work in, to be honest. They played Finsbury Park on the back of, in 2002, they played Finsbury Park on the back of, that was their first London outdoor show in ever, really. They'd done 3 nights at Brixton Academy, and the reason they played 3 nights at Brixton Academy in 2001 is because they played 1 show in London in the past 13 years before that. In fact, they played 1 public show in the 14 years before that, which was at Alexandra Palace on New Year's Eve. So they hadn't played enough live shows. They'd let their profile drop by not working. So, for example, the last time that New Order played a public show that you could buy tickets for that was full length in London was 1987 at Wembley Arena in December 1987. For Technique, they played 3 shows, they played 4 songs for 1 TV show in Brixton Academy. And then 1998, 10 years later, they played 1 show, New Year's Eve 1998. And a gig on New Year's Eve is a tough sell. You're going to have to really want to go to that, and it's not expensive. It's not like playing Wembley on a Saturday night. A New Year's Eve gig, you're either going to be paying for a cab back, which is going to be 50, 60 quid if you can get a cab, or staying in a hotel, or you have to live there. So the people that would come into town for a Saturday night, get the last train back, those people won't come into the show because they couldn't come to the show. As it happened, we stayed to see that show. We left at 4 in the morning. We got home at 6, and we drove. But not everyone has that option. The other time, then they played 3 shows at Brixton Academy. Then they played 1 show at Finsbury Park. So they're not really toured. They're not really tell people where they were. And then to go to headlining Hyde Park, which is 60, 70,000 people, the week before Live 8 and 2 weeks before REM at Hyde Park, there was a lot of competition for ticket money around about them. There was a lot of interest. There was a lot of shows vying for not a huge amount of money, and Hyde Park didn't sell particularly well, even with Moby and Graham Coxon on the bill. And the show wasn't particularly good. When I was watching it, I got the impression that there were 2 bands that were on stage. There was Phil and Bernard and Stephen that were playing as a unit, and then Peter Hook was walking all over the place, and it felt as if there'd been a disconnect between the 2 parts of the band, which became more and more apparent over time. I also saw 2 other shows in 2005. I will get to those in a minute, because the next thing that came out after that was the single Waiting for the Sirens Call. Now, the rumour was that Waiting for the Sirens Call wasn't going to get a standard 12-inch release or a CD release at all. And it didn't, because Waiting for the Sirens Call, at this point, the record label didn't know how to sell music to people. Even if were people even buying music, nobody really knew. So there was 3 7-inch singles released either at the same time or a week apart, I can't remember. Plus there was a container folder that you could get if you were on the band's mailing list. Of course, I was on the band's mailing list, so I got this container folder that you put the 3 7-inch singles in, which is here. And it opens out into a gatefold that says order, and then there's some flaps at the back. So there were 3 7-inch singles which came out. There was and I forget which order that they came out in, so I'm going to have to quickly look at the catalogue numbers. So the first one, by the look of it, was this, which is Waiting for the Sirens Call. Oh no, it's V2. This is V1. So this is Waiting for the Sirens Call, the first 7-inch single, backed with the Secret Machines remix of Temptation, and on the A side was a rich, costly radio edit, which effectively is the album mix in a heavily edited form with some extra overdubs. It's not very exciting, and then there's like a sleeve, and I don't know how much this cost. $1.99 maybe. These days they charge you a tenner for it. But you could only release 3 physical formats as a single. So the second single, again released a week later, I think, was the Everything's Gone Green and Waiting for the Sirens Call New Order Mix 7-inch. Although this might have been released at the same time. Again, 7-inch inner sleeve, a slightly adjusted photograph there so that you don't have women's bottoms in the shops, and the prudes that run the record shops don't sell it. And then the third single, which was a Jackknife Lee remix of Waiting for the Sirens Call, backed with a Richard X remix edit of Bizarre Love Triangle. So what you've got here is, it looks and feels like the band are starting to remix old material in order to drag out the commercial potential of the album. So you've got 3 7-inch singles, featuring the original potential cover for the album, then fit inside this weird 7-inch pack thing. And this was the kind of weird multi-formatting the band never used to do. It used to be there's a 7-inch, there's a 12-inch. In the days there's maybe a CD single. Now we've got 3 7-inch singles that you have to buy in bits, with a 4th bit that you can only get by mail order. And then there was like, well, there won't be a CD single of it. And then, you know, on the internet, because obviously the internet is full of people with opinions. Lots of people were like, what do you mean there's not going to be a CD single? And I think the record label kind of realised that maybe they'd made the bad decision. So Waiting for the Sirens Call was released on July the 29th. This is a 1-track promo CD of Waiting for the Sirens Call. Here is the 2-track commercial CD. And the 2-track commercial CD features the Rich Costey mix and the Jackknife and Lee mix, both of which are available in their 12-inch full-length forms here, running at about 6 minutes each. So the extra remixes of Temptation, Everything's Gone Green, Bizarre Love Triangle are only on the 7-inch single, which made me start to think that the band were thinking about either a greatest hits or a remix collection to kind of get a little bit more money out of the fans. And lo and behold, late 2005 comes the release of New Order's singles, a double CD of all the 7-inch mixes in order, well, except it isn't all the 7-inch mixes, because they've used an edit of an album track instead of the single version of 1963. They did an edit of the rough mix of Confusion instead of the 7-inch mix of Confusion. And in America, they had an extra remix, the Secret Machines remix, this time a full-length version of Temptation. And on the Japanese CD, you had the remixes of Bizarre Love Triangle and Everything's Gone Green as well. So no strangers to trying to separate us from our money. And singles felt like exactly what it was, which was a crass and commercial attempt to recoup some money from the £700,000 that had been spent making the album that nobody bought, because nobody bought CDs anymore. And it was backed up with a tour. I think the tour was 4 dates, of which I saw 2. There was a show at Brixton Academy in November 2005. There was a show at Manchester Apollo in November. There was an appearance at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in November 2005 at Alexandra Palace, which I saw. And then there was a show at a school in Salford again in November 2005, which was the last show for a while. And the shows that they had at that point, I remember October, November. They played a show for John Peel at, I think, the Queen Elizabeth Hall, 900 tickets, sold out like that. I didn't get a chance to go, so that's actually pretty much the only time that New Order played London that I didn't get a chance to see them. And they played a set of just Joy Division songs. And then they followed that up with the Brixton show. I went to see Brixton, and I must admit I wasn't as excited about seeing Brixton as I was about some of the other shows, because I'd seen New Order 4 months before, playing to an audience 10 times the size. They weren't particularly good. The weather was quite bad, and I just didn't enjoy the show. And they started to play a lot of Joy Division songs. So they were playing things like She's Lost Control, and to me, Joy Division are another band completely. That Joy Division are not New Order. New Order were 3 people that were in Joy Division with a different singer and a different guitarist or keyboard player. So to play Joy Division songs, to me, felt a bit like I was watching the wrong band. I loved New Order far more than I did Joy Division, because to me, as soon as I got into Joy Division were a historical artifact, a lost entity, trapped forever in amber on the 18th of May 1980 as a band that had ceased to exist. And so to see 3/4 of Joy Division play Joy Division songs, to me felt, I mean, obviously it was good that they were reclaiming their history, and those Joy Division songs do mean an awful lot to an awful large number of people, including myself. But I wasn't ready to have New Order start acting like they were some kind of nostalgia act at this point. I wanted the band to continue to go forward into the future, to write and record new material, to play the new material. And when they were playing songs like She's Lost Control or Transmission, it felt a little bit like karaoke Joy Division. It felt like, well, remember, this is what I used to look like. This is the girl that I used to be. It's like when you're I don't know, if you're middle-aged or something, and you get into the clothes that you fit when you were 20, and okay, it's a bit tight and it doesn't, and your hair has changed, and if I wouldn't try and pass myself off as somebody that I was 25 years ago. I can't do that. I haven't got the hair for it, for a start. And so to me, being nostalgic in that respect, it's a fool's game, is to try and pretend to be something you aren't, because you aren't that, and nothing makes you look more like what you are than trying to pretend to be something that you aren't. And at that point, playing Joy Division songs to me didn't feel as representative of who New Order were. Stroke R. It felt representative of who they once were. Going, this is who I used to be. Like going for a school reunion, and I'd be like, I don't really want to do that. I want to live in the now. So when I saw them at Brixton, and they played a lot of Joy Division songs, and I was like, well, that's great, but it's not that amazing. So even though I was at Brixton down the front, and yes, I'd had a drink or two, and they were playing songs like Warsaw, and I think probably Shadow Play as well, and I was like, this is great, but this reminds me of what it used to be. This is like seeing your first girlfriend after a 20-year gap and going, I don't know if you've seen her lately, but Christ, she's looking rough. It just wasn't the same. And so that's why I wasn't perhaps as enthusiastic about it. So I came out of the show at Brixton, and I'm like, well, they're very good, aren't they? It's New Order. They're one of my favourite bands. But something wasn't quite as good as it used to be. It might have been that the lineup had changed. It might have been that they were playing lots of Joy Division songs. It might have been that sometimes they just weren't enjoying the shows. Not every member of New Order liked touring. I don't think Bernard liked touring. Stephen Morris is not particularly good at expressing emotions, as he kind of indicates on the back of the book Record, Play, Pause here, the musical drumming robot. Peter Hook wears his heart on his sleeve. And there's differing views around what are going on there. So Peter was very clearly of the mindset that the band should have played more shows, should have made more money, should have made more effort. Bernard probably didn't want to play live so much for a number of reasons, including wanting to see his children grow up, but also you don't necessarily like touring, travelling, being away from home. And Stephen obviously is not always particularly good at showing deep emotions. Probably part of that is very similar to me, in so much as human beings can be quite emotional. They can be quite difficult to manage, unpredictable when they get annoyed, and sometimes human interaction can be a little scary. And so there's nothing wrong with that. But it felt to me like there was two bands at play here. And then the last time that I saw them was at the Alexandra Palace for the Rock and Roll Brit Awards, whatever it was, in November 2005. There was the band gave 30 tickets to people that were members of the New Order online forum, their fan club, so to speak, although it wasn't a fan club, or the ceremony mailing list. You put your name in, and if you live near enough and you were in the 30, then you got to see them. So I got to see New Order play in the public gallery at Alexandra Palace. Regret and Love Will Tear Us Apart. Gillian was there, but she wasn't performing with the band, which was kind of weird to see, actually, because the songs that they were performing, both Regret and Love Will Tear Us Apart, were songs that she was either around at the time or a member of the band at the time. And that brought the 2005 period to a close. So the band had released a new album. They'd barely toured 26 shows. They'd released 3 singles, and they'd done a greatest hits album, which they'd toured for the grand total of 4 shows. And it felt to me that the band weren't that interested, or perhaps it was getting really difficult to get them to make decisions. Their work rate had slowed down a bit. The shows were sporadic. Touring an album that cost £700,000 with 26 live shows, to me, didn't feel like a commitment. It felt like the same kind of contractual obligation that the band had around about the time of Republic, where they go, well, we're touring because we've got to, not necessarily because we want to. And I did get the feeling that there were two camps in the band. One, Peter Hook, was pulling the band towards doing more shows, and the other was towards doing less, and somehow those 26 were a compromise between the two. The plot thickens, because 2006 is an eventful year for the band, which I will mention later, because there are a number of releases in 2006. But the Waiting for the Sirens Call period is for me perhaps the band as that lineup, that era of the group, deserved probably, I think, a better and more glorious ending than the one that they originally got. I don't think Waiting for the Sirens Call is by any stretch of the imagination the best or the worst New Order LP. It's an okay album with one song too many on. Working Overtime is the song that I would take off this record. A sequence I don't particularly enjoy. Artwork that feels rushed because it absolutely is. And I think that it's not the band's best album at all. No reissues of this. There was a 2015 remaster, which is on double vinyl, which is here, which you can now also download. Comes in a download card. But again, this is not. If this is your favourite New Order album, you clearly haven't heard all the New Order albums, and that's reflected in the fact that only one of the songs, Waiting for the Sirens Call, is played with much regularity by the band. In recent years, they have played Guilt is a Useless Emotion, Krafty occasionally, sometimes I think they've played Who's Joe, maybe, but not very often. That's about it. It's also got what I regard to be the worst single New Order song on a New Order album. And depending upon the time of day and which way the wind's blowing, that song is either Working Overtime or I Told You So. But what you've got is you've got 4 or 5 different production credits on this album. So it looks tortured because it's produced by New Order and Stephen Street, or New Order and Stuart Price, or John Leckie and New Order, or New Order and Jim Spencer. And it's complicated. This album feels like it is a child of uncertain parentage and of mixed emotions. By the way, the Guilt is a Useless Emotion remix by Mac Quayle, which is on the American CD, is an absolute banger. Strongly recommend that. Was released as a promo CD. Potentially there was going to be a 4th single called Turn to go alongside the singles album. That didn't happen. And so therefore we now have New Order at the end of 2005 with an album that didn't do particularly well, a singles album they barely promoted, and a confused future ahead of them. So that's where I'm going to end it today. Hopefully this has been good for you. I will post links to some fantastic tracks in the bottom, including the Waiting for the Sirens Call tribute mix, which is the most incredible New Order remix you'll ever hear, because it's made up out of all the bits of all the other New Order songs. So it's got bits of Face Up and Bizarre Love Triangle and loads of other tracks in there. Well worth listening. I'll put it down in the comments there. Be lovely in the comments. Stay beautiful. I will see you all again soon. Take care of yourselves and each other. Bye.